things I had to learn when I started mixing IEMs, and we'll also touch on the age-old question that has been, asked by the Greeks and the Romans all throughout the period until 2020. What do cats have to do with IEM mixing? So a bit about me. As Nathan said, I'm a monitoring engineer for I want to say the biggest, but they obviously also the best rock band in Slovenia called Siddhartha. I also do occasional front of house sound for them. I also do front of house and monitor engineering jobs for other people as well, other artists, other bands. And for the past 2 years, I've dabbled with online education about audio and, put on some courses together with Nathan's help through Sound Design Live. So yeah, that's what I've been doing, talking about audio. That's what I love. That's what I love to do when I'm not actually doing audio. As Beth mentioned already, Nathan instructed us to sort of give you guys a glimpse of our family lives and who we are actually doing this for. So meet Lara, my better half, for the past 15 years. We've just reached our 15th anniversary, so it's still fresh and exciting. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it will last. Yeah, thanks. And she's the reason I do all this. So here's to you, my darling. But the other family that I really want to mention, since I haven't seen them for the last, whatever months, is my touring family. And this is the audio, video, lighting, management, production, whatever crew, just finishing off the 2018 Nomadic tour. This is the Siddhartha band tour that we did in arenas across Slovenia. So I miss all of these guys dearly and hope to see them soon, as I'm sure you are sort of dying to see everybody who you're working with on stages again. All right. I just want to touch briefly upon how it all started for me, how I became a monitoring engineer, and how this process of learning about IEM mixing and how it is different from the stuff that I've been doing before as a monitoring or front of house engineer. So the period that I sort of call the transition period started with me being a music store salesman, which was a great gig for a long, long time because I got to play with lots of gear and speakers, and we would be selling PA and studio gear and everything else. B, I got to meet lots and lots of musicians and studio artists, producers, and sort of poke my nosy head into the workflows and kept asking questions and learning a ton from that. The amount of information people will give you if you can offer a discount on a piece of studio gear is enormous. You should actually really try it sometime. I've been during all that period, I've been doing audio work sort of on the side, right? During the weekends and at nights, mixing bands, writing music, producing, performing. I started out as a musician, then sort of transitioned through studio work into live sound and really found my passion for live sound in my later years. So, being in the music store sort of kept my face in the loop, even when I wasn't working on stages, which was still quite a lot. I would go out with rental companies and occasionally with a specific band. But yeah, it was a great gig for, keeping in touch with a lot of people and sort of do a lot of networking on my own. So I met the guys from Siddhartha on several occasions when I was, either putting up PA systems or whatever. And we've had sort of an annoying relationship. Also, all of the guys sort of came to the store and bought some gear, and we knew each other, but we haven't actually worked together. And then, they had a really crappy gig. They went to a festival, didn't have their own monitoring engineer. Things went south. Not really sure what happened, but the sound check lasted for way longer than it should. And then when they hit the stage, nothing was as expected. So something went wrong. I don't know if it was a console crash or somebody forgot to either save or recall the right preset, but whatever it was, that sound engineer on that particular gig got me my job. So thanks for that. So that's basically how it works. You mess up and then somebody else gets your gig. The lesson here is don't mess up. After that gig, the keyboard player from the band, it was like 2 or 3 days later, got into the store, and you just started complaining. It was a rant. It was venting. What happened? You should have been there. It was like horrible. And I'm like, maybe I should have been there. Have you guys considered like a monitoring engineer? And if you haven't, maybe like this guy could be of assistance, right? So he said, yeah, sure. We've been thinking about it. And if we decide on it, we'll let you know. Two weeks later, I was signed on as the monitoring engineer. And it was slightly different than, coming into the band where you sort of decide what your gear is going to be and then tour with them. For what they were used to doing, they were just, coming to stages where the PA was provided for them. We didn't have our own desk. We were mostly using wedges, except for the keyboard player or the other band members were still using wedges. So my job was sort of getting that little consistency that was there and boosting it up, making sure that, night in, night out, those guys could have a consistent sound on the stage, making sure that nothing is feeding back, making sure that, things are working. So it wasn't really just sort of plug it in, turn it on, and you're all set. As with IEMs, we tend to tour right now. But it was a great listening exercise because I had to sort of memorize what these guys needed in their wedges and what those relationships would be and how they wanted things to sound. I would be taking notes on, the lead singer wants everything a bit brighter than I would prefer to be. Maybe the bass player wants a lot of hi-hat, but not a lot of snare, stuff like that. And I did that, the first gig that you do with those people, or a new band or a new artist that you're starting with, it's just keep, piling notes after notes after notes after notes. Until for the next gig, you sort of get ready. And, by the second gig, you should have all that information down. Referring back to the notes, and it really comes across as cool if you can go, hey, last gig, you had it set up like this. I set it up the same way. Can we just check? Instead of going through the same motion of, how much more, volume of the lead vocals do you want, or hi-hat or whatever. So keeping up with the flow of information was really, really great, and a great listening exercise, because for 6 months I would be doing that, taking whatever desk I was given, taking whatever wedge I was giving, and making a very consistent sound for these guys on a regular basis from every show, right? If you look at that picture, just if somebody's wondering, that's me behind the console. So I'm really doing that job, just if somebody is, sort of incredulous.
That could be anyone.
That could be, but It is me.
No, we believe you. We believe you.
I have the bank transfers to prove it. So after 6 months of doing that, a decision was made by the band with a lot of sort of gentle pushing from my direction, whispering in their ears, go IEM, go IEM, because I wanted to have more consistency. And it was like the greatest idea for them. And I would recommend it to every band. From a theoretical point of view, it all makes sense, right? It's all consistent. We would be using our own console. We would be using our own IEM rig. Get most of the microphones, maybe rent out a couple of them. And Bob's your uncle, set and forget. Every show, same sound. In theory, right? And that's the theory that I've been pushing for. Now, why do I say that in theory? It's because I haven't done that before. I haven't mixed IEMs. Theoretically, IEMs sound great, but then the decision was made, and I was faced with the guy saying, "Okay, let's go on IEMs, but you have to make it work for us." And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, we'll do that." If you remember Pooch's presentation, say yes, figure it out later, right? And that's exactly what I did. And as with all great visionaries that we know and love, everything starts with Google search, right? How to do IEMs, Google it. That's basically what I was going for. That was in 2015. And what I realized was there is no one place online or anywhere else for that matter where you could go and learn specifically everything you need to know about mixing IEMs. You have to dive into the belly of the beast that is called the internet and do your research. So I did, had to decide on what earphones we would be using. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see custom IEM manufacturers, and trust me, all of them can make really, really great IEM headphones, but every one of them has like between 10 and gazillion models, between 1 and 26 or 23 drivers internally. And I had to go, through all of those sort of manufacturers and figure out what would be the best solution for the band. And sometimes it's nothing to do with the quality or the driver count or whatever it is. It has to do with other things like, do we have access to them where we regionally are? Where is the service department? What happens if they break? Is there a warranty? Who do I call in case of emergency? So if there's a great product, an IEM earphone that you can only find in South Korea with their representative in Hong Kong, and I'm based in Slovenia, Europe, sorry guys, no sale there. I need to have reliability and I need to have accountability on the manufacturer's side to sort of, be able to support my artist in case something goes wrong. And as we all know, things will eventually go wrong. It's just a matter of time. So once we decided on the earphones, and we can, if you guys want, I can talk about specific models, but we can open up a whole can of worms there. We decided on the mixer, and as with everything, we go through the same process. So exactly what is the input-output count that I need, especially at the output count, because smaller format mixers sort of tend to run out of those very, very quickly. Everything, if you consider the band has 5 members, then that's 10 outputs, like 10 physical outputs that need to go out of your console, or whether you're running it through Dante, Muddy, AES-50, whatever digital protocol you are using. But the output side for IEM mixing can sometimes be even a more deciding factor than the input side, especially if you have to run communications, other stems that you might be doing recording on that console as well. So there's a lot of things to consider, and please also add contingencies, right? If you know that you have 5 members in the band, think if there might be an occasion where they might want to have special guests appear during their concerts, and say, okay, I'm ready to maybe do another 3 or 4 mono mixes, or maybe 2 stereo mixes for 2 more special guest stars, and have that mindset of anticipating things when you are specifying your gear. The question was presented whether to go wired or wireless. How do you decide on that? It would be easiest to say, okay, we'll put everybody on wireless because then I can monitor everything through my wireless body pack and have everything dialed in sound-wise. But experience has shown that if you can avoid wireless, you should. You don't have to deal with that many frequencies. RF coordination becomes easier. It is more reliable. There's less artifacts going through the wire than through the wireless systems. If you remember what Drew was talking about in his presentation on how much of the frequency spectrum you lose with the RF systems. So all of those things need to be considered. Who is moving on stage? Who is static on stage? So we already established that the keyboard player is not going to move, so he can be on a wired system. And then the drummer, is he moving throughout the performance? If he's not, and he's okay with being, connected to a drum in-ear amp, then that's great. If not, then you have to find other solutions. So all those considerations came into play. Add all of the rest of the gear, butt kickers, amplifiers for butt kickers. So you have maybe a drum stool that needs to, rattle when the drummer hits his kick. But those butt kickers can also be attached to platforms for bass players if they want to have something rattle underneath them and they're not getting that from the subs. Maybe the subs are directional and moving away from the stage, but they need that something, especially if you try to eliminate all of the amplification from the stage as well. So you decide on the antennas, the antenna combiners, the cabling. The batteries has been a consideration of mine since we have started this journey. So how much do you actually spend on batteries? Should you be using batteries that can be reused, so rechargeable batteries, which is in the professional wireless audio world always considered as a no-no, because they tend not to output the same voltage as the ones that you have for just a single use. But you can get manufacturer supplied batteries or battery packs that you can then recharge, and those will give you great value for your money, especially if you have a lot of these systems and otherwise would have to schlep around another truck of batteries for every show, right? And then there's just in case gear. So when you start building an IEM rig, one of the main considerations that should be going through your head is what happens when, shit hits the fan, when everything goes south. What happens if a body pack sort of goes out on you, which has happened to me? What goes out if there's a cut in the, let's say, wired systems connection? How do you approach that? What are your backup scenarios in that opinion? So for wireless systems, we decided to go with additional body packs that I can then use in case of an emergency, and just swap them out really quickly between band members and myself. For earphones, earphones will die on you, especially with people that sweat a lot, like, heavy hitting drummers and people that really run around on stage. They will die on you. So you better have a backup solution for that. It can either be the same model but universal fit instead of custom in-ears. So maybe they can be shared between various people, or maybe just from user to user, whoever is experiencing the emergency. There could be a secondary pair of earphones that it is cheaper, or if you can do the right thing, you can actually order 2 pairs of the same custom IEMs and be really, really secure that whatever happens, you have a pair in your rack or in your bag or wherever that you can swap out really quickly. Again, had to do that on more than one occasion. So think contingency. Even before you start doing anything, planning ahead, anticipating what might go wrong can save you a lot of issues down the line, okay? And just a quick note on this question that I get asked all the time, universal fit earphones versus custom molded earphones. I think that for any serious use of IEM systems, you have to have a custom ear molded earphone for several reasons. One, rejection of stage noise. So you get better isolation from everything else that is going on around, meaning that you can run your IEM mixes at a lower level, preserving your hearing, right? 2, the consistency of sound, because if you have your custom IEMs not move in your ears while you're performing, that sound can be extremely consistent. Please take note about the way manufacturers sort of instruct you how to take the impressions, the ear impressions. So Ultimate Ears, the company that we worked with, and I know that other companies do that as well, but for people who are singers, they ask you to take the impression with your mouth open. So when you go to the audiologist, they will put like a piece of foam in between your teeth. You sort of sink your teeth into that, and wait for the molds to dry out, and then have them taken out. And that is because as you are moving your jaw, you are basically effectively changing the shape of your ear canal, or your shape of your ear, basically. So if you don't have that, when you start singing, you will be losing, you might be losing a lot of low frequencies, but even if you're not losing the low frequencies, you will still get like a frequency shift. It would be like somebody adding a band pass? Yeah, a band pass filter with, let's say, 3 dB gain and just moving the frequency around as you're singing. So that's no good, right? Yeah, so custom IEMs will absolutely be necessary for anybody who's serious about doing live sound and live performances, and can be a lifesaver. And then I decided to use the same model and make of earphones as most of my band. So the drummer and the bass player have an extended bass range model that allows them to hear the lower frequencies better. The rest of the band has another model, which is basically just all around. And that's the one that I'm using and sort of adapting my listening experience for the ones that have the extended bass range, just by talking to the band members and adjusting what they are hearing to their taste in their ears. So you don't necessarily have to have the same make and model, but there's always a question, can I monitor what I'm mixing in IEMs through my wedge if I don't have earphones? And the answer is only as a last resort, and you will get very, very iffy results. So it's always better to use the same model and make as your performer is using. That will give you the best resolution and the best consistency. B, using another brand custom ear, so it doesn't have to be the same make or model, but you can still have some sort of you can still make a mental picture in your mind. What is the difference between what you're hearing and what they are hearing, just by talking to them. Checking if it's bright enough or dull enough or whatever they want in their ears. Third option, universal fit earphones. Again, not as good, but will get the job done. Fourth option, over-ear headphones will still work better than using the wedge, and only as a last resort can you use a wedge to monitor IEMs. You just don't get the resolution, you don't get the stereo field. Even if you're using stereo wedges, it just doesn't sound the same way. So if you absolutely have to and have no other way of doing it, that's the only way you should be doing it. But in any other case, bring a pair of headphones, use those, okay? And then after all that, rig and gear acquisition and all that was settled and my Google search was done and, plugged up with all of the manufacturers of IEM gear in the world, then you can start setting up your decks in your favor by setting up your desk correctly. The main question that I was, pondering the entire time is how to monitor all mixes. And the answer is you don't. You pick a reference mix and then monitor that one. And it can either be a separate mix that you have built for yourself, and then go off of that by adapting it for everybody else, or listening to a mix of the guy who's signing your checks, basically. So in a band, that would be usually the lead vocalist, unless the guitar player is the manager, then you have a judgment call to make. But I listen mostly to the mixes of the lead singers because I want to know what's going on in their head. And I would listen to that all the time and then reference every other mix off of that mix, right? So I listen to what they want to hear. It doesn't have to be the mix that I would mix necessarily for myself, but I make a mental image of that and then reference all other mixes to what I'm hearing. It's like, playing chess with 8 people. If there's 4 members in the band, somebody screaming in your comms and, a production manager trying to talk to you while you're doing your work. So, yeah. The second thing that I was wondering is where and how to add ambient mics. And if you guys are going, what are ambient mics? These are probably the most important microphones that you will be using with IEMs. And there's always a question of how much of those ambient microphones will be added to your mixes. But the reason we add those ambient microphones into the mix is to have the response of the crowd when something happens on stage that warrants a response. So if it's the end of the song and there's people clapping and yelling obscenities, whatever is happening on stage and in the audience, the band has to feel connected to that. They have to feel and hear that energy. So there are several techniques of how to add ambient microphones, but the most basic one is just have 2 microphones on stage pointing into the crowd, one stage left, one stage right. Maybe turn them towards the center slightly, and mix them into their ears with the right panning position. So it doesn't help the artist if somebody screams on that side and they hear it in the left ear. they turn their head over there and look dumb, you're not helping your job. You're not getting paid for that gig. That's all I'm saying. So yeah, ambient mics are the mics that I tend to ride most of all out of all the channels on my desk. So it could be, it could be the singer saying, "And now everybody," and he wants to hear the crowd sing. So ambient mics go up. It's the end of the song and everybody's clapping. The ambient mics go up. There's the quiet part where, the band has to be intimate. Ambient microphones go down. And how much you do that will depend on the end user, basically. Some people want to have a lot of that crowd in the mixes. Some of them, they really want to sort of stay in their own bubble. But at the end of the day, they will have to have some sort of communication with the crowd, and ambient microphones will be the ones that will do that for you. This is a big one for me. How do you set up effects when you are sort of planning your IEM strategies on the board? Because if you think about it, let's say that I have three effects on my board. So a short reverb, a long reverb, and a delay. If you have the long reverb sent into one of the auxiliary mixes, how do you do that, right? You have an auxiliary, you push that channel into that auxiliary gets returned into a channel return, and that channel return then gets sent to the IEM mix of that performer, right? Everybody following that? So let's do it again. Auxiliary of the channel gets sent into the effects end gets into the effect, comes back into the effects return, which is basically effectively an input channel on your console. That input channel gets sent into the auxiliary send of your performer. Right. So you have to be very meticulous about how much of that return channel gets fed into that particular artist's wedge, especially if you're using one reverb for multiple artists, because that effect return will have the same level of effect for, even if you don't want it to, for, let's say, specific auxiliary mixes. What I'm trying to say over here is that if your lead singer wants to have a lot of reverb in their own mix, that level of effect return will stay on that input channel, right? So when the other, let's say, backing vocalists want to have less of their vocals, the ratio between the dry and the wet signal is then totally screwed up, especially if they want to have a lot of reverb in their own mix. So you start sort of chasing your own tail. And the best way to sort of eliminate that is to have specific effects for specific band members. If you can't do that and you're running out, try and figure out how much effects you can get away with, or reducing the effects once you add the ambient microphones, because ambient microphones will sort of run you as additional effects, like a reverb of that particular room or that particular arena. And that is usually in proportion to the level that is in the front of house mix, right? Because you're listening to the ambient microphones and they will be picking up the PA. And you will get like more presence of the lead vocal, less presence of the backing vocals, because the backing vocals are usually just tucked underneath the lead vocal. So that can really help you in, solving that effect conundrum. Push up the ambient microphones, see if anybody's complaining about effects, then start adding effects on top of that. It can be a lifesaver if you're working with a mixing console that doesn't have that many effect sends, things for you to play with. So that can be a lifesaver. And then auxiliary bus setup. Drew already mentioned that in his presentation, if you remember it, pre or post fader mixing. What I tend to do is, like he mentioned, put the console in post fader mode, just so that I can have all of my main layer, or what you would usually say like the main bus faders, channel faders, at 0. And then if all the auxiliary sends are in that post fader mode, picking up that channel fader, moving it up and down will influence all of your auxiliary mixes, right? Everybody good on that one, on that concept? So if you're running all of your auxiliary mixes in post fader mode, controlling the channel fader of that particular channel will affect the level in all of the mixes. Now, why is that desirable? If there's an emergency on stage, something happens, somebody trips over something, and there's a microphone that was supposed to be 2 meters away from the source is now like 20 centimeters away from the source and is blaring in your in-ears, but it's blaring on the input side, right? So instead of fixing it at gain and trying to figure out what went wrong, the quickest solution is to put your finger on that channel fader, bring it down for everybody involved, deal with it later. So it's an emergency. It can be treated as an emergency fader for everything that is going on stage. B, it can be a great mixing tool. So if you just want like a couple of dB on that guitar solo for everybody involved, then you can use that. You can use the technique that Drew showed you. You can use post fader for all auxiliary mixes, but only use the channels for that particular user in pre-fader mode. So if you have a bass player and you have a bass DI, bass mic, and a bass vocal, let's say, those 3 channels will get sent in pre-fader mode into the bass player's in-ear. Everything else is getting sent in post-fader mode. So there are various strategies that you can work out. But when I started out, mixing as I would from front of house position, everything in pre-fader mode. And then I would have to go in and figure out, every mix position, every mix send on its own. And it's just a lot of work. You have to find a way to be very quick and very efficient when mixing IEMs specifically. And we'll get to why later on in that presentation. And then we've been talking about this, like within ears, it's all about panning. That's why we try to encourage people to use stereo if at all possible. So with mono, everything is collapsed and it sounds really unnatural. And it just gives you the disadvantage of spacing out things and not having to deal with level that much, but you can sort of get clarity and separation between different elements of the mix by placing them in the pan position. Mixing IEMs is like creating studio stereo mixes for, let's say, 5 people. And each of them, it's like the band's greatest moment and the sound engineer, if you're a studio sound engineer, worst moment. It's like, you have mixed the album and then you have the guitar player say, hey, can we bring up the guitars? And you're like, yep, that's the mix that you will hear. And then the bass player comes and say, hey, can we get more bass? Because I play that part. And you're like, and you say, yep, absolutely, bass up. And if you have to decide on which of those mixes, is the best one, you have a fight in between the band. The good thing with IEMs is everybody gets to be right? Their own mix is what they need to hear. But panning will allow you to do that. And it also creates a great orientational device. So looks like I'm going through puberty again. Great orientational device on stage, right? So if I am the lead singer standing stage center and I have my guitar player on the left and bass player on the right, then I should hear my guitar player's vocal from the left, my bass player's vocal from the right, my guitar player's guitar from the left, bass, can't really do much about that. Probably put it in the center, but you know what I mean. So when I'm facing the audience, the position of things in my ears should resemble the placement of players or artist members on stage. So that is going to be one of the things that you will have to play with as you start, working with IEMs. And then EQ, which is sort of related to panning, because if you do the panning correctly, you have to do less EQ, right? Consider that. If you have spatial separation, you don't have to have the same amount of frequency separation. You don't have to notch every instrument's space in the frequency spectrum that meticulously, because you have separated it in the stereo field, and now you can maybe have a fuller sound. And also when we come to 3D mixing, Planck technologies and all that, that is like their major argument. So if you have more spatial awareness and basically more space to put your elements in, that increased separation in space can reduce your EQ moves. Cut, don't boost, at least for your first and second move. That is going to be huge for IEMs because you don't want to be, especially if you're using wireless signals, you don't want to be overloading, especially the higher frequencies or the extremely low end frequencies, just because of the wireless RF propagation. And it's a good practice, try and shape the sound with cutting first and then boosting as a last resort. And there's one more thing that we have been talking about a lot, but it is crucial for IEM users: latency. If you think about it, when a singer sings into her microphone, she needs to hear that as instantaneously as possible into her ear, because when she's producing that sound, she's already resonating in her head. Sorry for touching my microphone. I'll try to avoid that. She's already resonating in her head, and that is instantaneous, right? So when you introduce the loop from the microphone through the cable, AD converter, optical fiber, whatever it is, into your console, DSP processing, all of those processes will add latency, especially if you have digital microphone, let's say, adds a millisecond. I'm just ballparking here. Your digital console will add 2 milliseconds. If you have DSP processing on that, let's say if you're using Wave server or UAD or whatever, which is something that we shouldn't do without consulting Robert Scoville first, then that will add latency as well. So by the time you reach the ears, that latency can be 6, 7, 9, 10 milliseconds. And that is absolutely unacceptable for the person singing, right? There has to be no disconnect between what they are hearing into their resonating head, and you will basically, because of the occlusion effect, have more bass frequencies with the high F frequencies and everything else of the spectrum that you are supplying through the IEMs. So latency reduction game becomes your number one pastime. Forget Netflix. Try and reduce latency in your systems. You'll be greatly rewarded. I remember a presentation, I think Volker was talking about a very famous singer who was performing in Las Vegas, and she said, "Yeah, I can't use that. I can't use this wireless microphone because I can sense the latency," and the latency on that microphone was 1.6 milliseconds. I'm ballparking here, but I think I got the numbers right. And they had to. She went to the Sennheiser because she's a very famous performer, and the guys from Sennheiser said, right, and they designed a special analog receiver, transmitter, not really sure, but an analog part in that chain that reduced the latency from 1.6 milliseconds to 1.3 milliseconds. And once that reduction was made, she was happy. So there will be people who will not react to latency, and there will be people who will, not be able to perform with that same exact amount of latency. So check with your artist whether or not they are having issues. If they're not bringing it up, it's a safe bet that they don't have issues. But if they keep bringing up, something is off, latency should also be one of your considerations. All right,
Aleš, do you want
building a mix.
Break the questions?
Sure, let's go.
We've got a handful of them. Where are you originally from?
Slovenia, Europe. If you look at the map of Europe, we're right between Italy, Austria, Croatia, and Hungary. So all the fun states.
All the fun states. A lot of people were concerned why in that image you're on stage right. They really want you to be on stage left.
Let me see if I can get to that slide. Shoot. Sure, yeah, stage left, better way to go. What you are seeing here is a stage where we had a gig with two bands. So there was Siddhartha band, and left of the Siddhartha band, so stage left of the Siddhartha band was another band. And they would sort of, play each other's songs and switch band members in between them. So there was no way for me to do monitoring for Siddhartha and be on that side of the stage. So that's why I'm standing over there.
Elliot wants to know if you've used the butt kicker thing often. Do you think it makes a big difference?
Yeah, I suggest it to basically every drummer that I encounter. It's a feel thing. I think that they can play better if something moves them. Since you are sort of removing the sound of the subs or the rattling of the subs that they're used to from their ears by isolating them with IEMs, when the kick hits, there's absolutely nothing that's going on, right? In terms of vibrations, because everything is transferring or pushing away from them in terms of kick. Like when you hit a snare, you can sort of get the sense of the vibration of the snare through your hands. But if you're used to playing gigs where subs are rattling and you are used to having a drum fill with two subs right next to your ear, you will miss that vibration, and that vibration can be crucial for a drummer when performing well, especially if you want to have dynamics. Having said that, you have to play with the volume knob on the amplifier to get it just right, and you have to let the drummer know that they should expect their drum thrones or the drum seats to come undone after a certain period of time. So if they're used to having the same drum throne to last them like 5 to 6 years, that should probably be reduced now to 1.5, maybe 2 years. It's just because it's shaking so hard that everything sort of starts coming apart, and that's just a consideration. Yeah.
Okay. Jonathan wants to know what mics you're using for the ambient mics.
I'm sort of switching between, it depends on the venue and what I want to achieve. So if it's a really large venue and I want to sort of penetrate through the crowd, I would use gradient microphones, shotguns. I'm not picky with those microphones. It's more about directivity in what part of the audience I'm trying to bring into the ears than specific make or model. Most of the times I'm just using two small diaphragm condensers. Whatever we have on board is great. It gives me a bit more detail, and I can sort of use them as reverbs better if they are condenser mics. And if it's a small club, I have also done just placing two dynamics placing them on the stage, capturing the audience, so like the first couple of rows of audience there, because that's what they would be experiencing, right? If you're in a club and you're used to two people like being right there in front of you, that's what you want to hear. In an arena, if you take the IEMs off, you want to hear the entire stadium. So I might add a couple of mics left and right to pick up, different portions of the stage, or sorry, the audience. So it depends on what I'm going for, and the answer is all of the above. So every microphone that I can get, I will test out and use for specific uses.
Okay. Aleš, do you create a mix also for front of house just in case the desk went down?
The answer is no.
Okay. What do you think of immersive audio for in-ear? Personally, I think it's genre and instrument specific. Some genres and instruments need more technical listening than a fancy immersive one. Let me know your opinion. Thanks, from Ital.
That's a big question, and I don't really have an answer for you because I haven't tested it out on the road. I've seen a few demos. I've heard a few demos. In theory, it's great. Once I have 10 shows done with that, I'll give you my honest opinion. But until that, it's a great concept, and some people swear by it, and some people say it's totally useless. Always, in between that spectrum until I actually get to play with the game.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Yeah, Scott wants to know what's the longest amount of latency is acceptable for IEMs. I feel like it's around 2 milliseconds.
That, again, like I said, it would depend on your end user. I would shoot for everything lower than 5 milliseconds. That sort of tends to still work for me. Even you can try that in the studio, right? Get a DAW, get a microphone, start raising the buffer size. The DAW will tell you what the latency, the total system latency is, and just try it out for yourself, right? The second thing that you should do is get on stage, get the singer's microphone, sing. That's going to be a big one for you. If you can hear it because you want to test for latency and are listening for it and can't detect it, then chances are that if somebody is not listening for it, won't detect it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Big Man says, do you ever polarity reverse an IEM, or are you EQing an IEM? And I guess he means the outputs, just the last output of the EQ. Polarity
reverse, no. EQ all the time. I don't really see a way where I could be like the reason why I would be inverting polarity of IEM mixes on the outputs. On the inputs, of course, like, getting the input channels to sort of sit well together, it's fine. But on the outputs, it just doesn't make sense, right?
Cool. All right, that's it for now. Thanks, Aleš.
Cool. Okay, guess I'm running out of time, so let's just get through slides 10 through 250 in the next 10 minutes. So when you are building a mix, this is the key question: how to mix for someone else. And we have talked about this, and other people have talked about this, but building references. That's why I said, touring with a band without IEMs, listening to their wedges, seeing or hearing what works for them level-wise, ratio-wise, between instruments, works. It's such a great learning experience. And when you start mixing for somebody else, you have to sort of put yourself in their shoes. And something that Pooch also mentioned, virtual soundcheck nowadays is a must for IEM engineers as well. Grab a multi-track of their performance. That's what I did before I sort of started transitioning the band. I would record every show that I could, build a library of their shows. And once it came to building mixes for them, I would run the virtual soundcheck, create a mix relative to what I knew would sort of suit their needs and their preferences, and have that as a starting point, so they don't feel thrown off the first time they hear it. So yeah, virtual soundcheck, I think, is one of the best thing that happened to live sound since going from mono to stereo. I really do. It can have that big of an impact on your work, right? Plus, IEMs are situations where the things that would freak you out the most when you were using wedges are now actually working in your favor. We all have that band member that says, hey, more me, please. And we've, if you have attended Laureen's presentation, we now know that might differ between male and female performers, which was a great insight for me as well. But in IEM situations, more me principle works for you, because you know that particular band member would want more of their own signal into their own mix, which makes sense. But if you are sort of building a front of house mix, so you have a reference level, maybe you can start that. You can start there if you haven't worked with the band and have no idea of what they're listening to and what their habits are. Chances are, if you build a nice front of house mix and then just push their own channels up 5 dB, 6 dB, 5, 6 dB, let's start with that you will be golden 85% of the times, right? So the stuff that might be driving you mad when you're mixing monitors from front of house can actually work in your favor when you're just mixing IEMs. We've talked about this, stereo placement. Again, spacing out the elements relative to the band member's position on stage. So think about that. I mentally, when I'm panning, I mentally stand on stage and see where the other members are and decide what that means relative to my mix. So that can be a great opportunity for you. And then what do I listen to? I've mentioned that in the previous segment. Either a mix that I have built on my own, or the lead vocalist mix, probably, because it probably will resemble the front of house mix the most if you think about it, because the lead singer wants to have the most amount of lead vocal in their mix, which is something that you would probably have to do if you're mixing front of house. But you wouldn't necessarily build a front of house mix with a keyboard blaring 20 dB over everything else if you're listening to the IEM mix of a keyboard player, for example. So, picking your reference levels will be, reference mixes will be something that can really get you going. Now, let's talk about, just briefly, about two things that I feel are really important and have nothing to do with the technical side of things, everything to do with keeping your job as an IEM monitor mixer. Commanding the stage, we start transitioning into the interpersonal communication stuff, right? You, as the monitoring engineer for IEMs, have to have total control of the system. You have to decide when the body packs get turned on. And if you delegate that, that's fine, but it's still your responsibility. You have to say, okay, you can turn them on, but you can only do that because I know I have everything muted on the console. You have to have the option of saying, okay, I will only deploy the body packs that have been checked and double checked and triple checked by me. You have to have total control of the system. It is your gig. Nobody else's. Even if you have assistants, if you have stage crew, stage hands, whatever it is, the blame stops here. Your responsibility. Okay? Total control of the system. In relation to that, you have to have absolute control over the users. It doesn't matter if it's a local band or if you're mixing for Beyonce. If you know that there's something going on that might damage their ear their hearing, or that might seriously disrupt what they're listening to in their headphones because it's something that they're doing, you are the one that has to stop it. Okay. Just an example. There was a user that decided, just because it was his IEM rig, to go and change the frequency on the IEM transmitter while he still had his body pack on and his in-ear earphones in his ears. And if you've done any work with wireless systems, you know that when you have a frequency mismatch, there's a screechingly loud digital white noise that comes out of the body packs into your ears. You are the person responsible for that, right? Total control of the system, total control over the users. So once the band walks in, you have to be behind the console and not leave until every user, even if it's the guy on the comms, hasn't stopped using a part of your system. If anything else you take away from my presentation, that is the one. Safety is key. Then we go to reading cues. This is a whole section that we could touch upon, but we don't have time for them. I just want to mention that, when you start working with a band, you have to decide on what the cues are by talking to them and saying, okay, more, this means more, this means less, or this means less, this means okay. Because sometimes it happened, somebody was doing this, and I'm then not sure if that means everything is okay, or I want more of whatever it is they're talking about. Catch my drift? So communication is going to be key. Once you work with the band for a long time, you discover cues on your own. It's like magic, because when you start listening to the same song, the same mix, you can figure out if maybe there's a band member who is slightly out of time, and it might be beneficial to just slightly turn up, whatever it is time-wise that they need to hear. It could be a sampler or a click or hi-hat or a snare into their own IEM mix. Should you do that with every performer? Absolutely not. Only do that with people that, you have developed trust with, know the material really well, know how it usually sounds, and do it very gently. So these are not like 5 dB or 6 dB cues, right? It could be 1 dB, 2 dB max. But if you can do that right, you can get throughout, a tour or a leg of a tour without any communication from the band. Hey, bring this up. If you can anticipate it, you're going to be golden. Nobody wants to talk the IEM engineer. That's the great challenge of our lives. Once the gig is going, nobody wants to have to keep eye contact with you. They might want to, but they never want to have to. There we go. I just made that completely complicated for no good reason. And of course, establish chain of command. If people know that you are the guy who's responsible, you are the guy who's responsible. So be there. If you delegate work, then let people know what the other person is responsible for and what they should maybe talk to them about. Right. The last thing maybe I want to discuss before we go into the questions and the age-old question, what do cats have to do with mixing IEMs, is the philosophy of IEM. Now, take a look at that picture. That's me during a gig for my band. And some engineers would take a look at that and say, dude, what are you doing? You should be focusing. And my answer is, I am. That's exactly what my band needs from me in that particular moment. So it's all about trust. And trust is the most important part of IEM mixing. And you build trust through communication, getting the job done right, and having the right attitude. That's all. 3 key components, and you're done. But you have to do that consistently, day in, day out. They know that they can lean on you and trust you. That's it. Supporting your artist in that particular picture, in that particular moment, I knew that the guitar player had a really difficult solo for a one-off gig that he was practicing on for, practicing for like maybe 2 months. And that was the moment of him finishing the solo and looking at me. And I was like, yeah, dude, you nailed it. That established a bond between us, right? It was the perfect reaction for that moment. I could have been focused on my mixing console and, intently staring at one of the other band members, but, that wouldn't create that special moment between us. And it's all about that, supporting your artist with whatever is necessary for them. Some people would hate that, but it's your job to discover what that would be. Some people would want you to stay calm, reserved, focused, just looking in their eyes whenever they turn around. Some people want that energy, but it's up to you to provide it, okay? Nerves of steel. IEM engineers and monitoring engineers in particular, but IEM engineers, since they are so close to, being the people who talk into the artist's ears and stuff like that, we are also the first fence that all the shit hits. So if they're having a bad day, if they had a row with their spouse, if something was off for breakfast, if somebody forgot to brush their teeth, it might be your fault, and you should know that it might be your fault and not make a scene about it, right? You are there to support your artist. It's not about you. Don't take crap. I'd never said that. Don't take personal abuse. Don't take misogyny. Don't take it. But also be aware of the fact that you are the guy that has to have nerves of steel in stressful situations. And these, live gigs always are stressful situations, especially for artists. We talk about this technical stuff and mixing. Just always imagine, as an artist, you are on stage performing for people. There's stage fright, there's bearing it out, or if you're a singer-songwriter, people are judging you constantly. And sometimes, it gets to you. If you have support from your team and your monitoring engineer in this case, it will go a long way. Nerves of steel. And also being present, like I mentioned, notice when there's a guitar solo, be ready for that. When there's a keyboard solo, be ready for that. Keep your eyes locked on at least one band member. It might not be the exact one who's wanting your attention, but they can't say, hey, you were doodling on your phone, right? You were doing your job. Okay. Right. So for the final question, and I know that we only still have 5 minutes to go, but I would sort of want you guys to guess, if you can unmute yourself and say what the cats have to do with mixing IEMs.
All right, I'm really curious. What are people going to say? What do you think, Kim, Connor, Scott, Kendall, Carrie, Scott, Liam, Penny?
Nothing? Nope.
Andre says Cat 5.
Cat 5. Close, maybe. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. You see, the question I asked earlier about reversing the polarity on your in-ear. We've had situations around here where we've got floor wedges and in-ear as well. So I was wondering if you've ever had a situation like that where you've got in-ears and wedges. So would you reverse the polarity of the in-ear? And secondly, there was a time, or most times here around here, the drummers around here will tell you the side fields powered fully, and they also want in-ears. So in situations like that, what would you do? How would you handle it?
Cool question. Now answer my question. What do cats have to do with IEM mixing before we go? Aha, that's the big one. I'll do the answer for this slide first, if you don't mind, then get back to your question. If I don't get to it, I'll answer in the chat. Is that okay?
That's all right. That's all right.
Perfect. It's like I know how this works, man. Right. So what do CATs have to do with IEM mixing? And CATs is an acronym that I have decided are the 4 key concepts of IEM mixing. Take out your pens, ladies and gentlemen. If you have been snoozing and, sort of doodling away while I was doing this presentation, this is the key concept that you should take notice of and write down. This is the money channel right here. Consistency. You have to perform every night with the same level of consistency so that when your artists get on stage and play that first note, doesn't matter whether or not they had sound check or not, they should hear the exact same thing. Number 1, cat number 1. Cat number 2, altruism. We have heard it time and time again, and I'll repeat it again. Check your ego at the door. It is not about what you think they should be getting into the in-ears. It's what they tell you they should be getting into the in-ears, and that's exactly what you should be providing. You are providing a service for them, and they are the customer, and they need to get what they need to get to perform. I've had mixes that sounded nothing like I would have done if I were mixing for myself, but that's what they need to perform, okay? Cat number 3, timing. Do whatever you have to do to A, anticipate things before they happen, and B, when you get a request for a change from somebody on stage, that change should be immediate. I'm not talking 10 seconds, I'm talking like yesterday. So whatever you have to do in terms of prepping your console and laying it out so it's always the same channels on the left and the same channels on the right, and you know exactly where to go for the EQ, exactly where to go for the dynamics, exactly where to go for that auxiliary send, you have to be there on time. And the final one, which I have mentioned before, safety first. You are putting elements that are capable of extreme levels of sound pressure level, and you're putting them like millimeters away from their eardrums. Take care of your artist's ears. Please, please, please. If nothing else, that's your number 1 priority. And this is the concept that I have sort of put at as the last thing of my presentation, because I want you to walk away with this. Safety first, okay? Now, since I have eaten up all my time, questions, maybe get 1 or 2 in. Oh, I can answer, big man. So yeah, polarity reversal on IEMs when you're using wedges. I don't tend to polarity reverse. What I could do is a sort of, no, not even that. Because think about it, IEMs are constant. The distance between the speakers and the ears are constant. So if you polarity reverse with a wedge or with whatever they have, it's going to only be okay in that particular spot. And as they move, that polarity is going to get out of phase. So you might do a trick where you sort of roll off the low end of your IEM mix if you know they're getting a lot of sub or monitor mix from the wedges. But I wouldn't do polarity reversal on IEMs. And the second question, I really can't remember, so I'll answer it in the chat.
Aleš, thank you so much. That was amazing. Everybody clap for Aleš. Yay. He's doing 5 days of this with me. Can you believe it? And a presentation. Aleš, that was really great. We've got loads of questions for you. We're going to save them all, so you should take a break. And when you get back, you can go through them diligently in your own time in the chat. So thank you very much, Aleš, for joining us on Live Sound Summit.
Thank you for having me, guys. It was a blast.